judge overseeing the New York hush money case against Donald Trump has decided against delaying the trial or dismissing the case altogether.
So ridiculous, the cases. Every one of them is ridiculous. I respect the appellate division for substantially reducing that ridiculous amount of money.
If he's convicted, I will still vote for him because there's someone else running for office that should have been convicted a long time ago.
Hello, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Welcome to a special hour-long edition of America Decides. Thanks for being with us. We are following significant developments in two legal cases involving former President Donald Trump, and both of them are in New York. First, there's a civil fraud case. A New York appeals court cut Trump's bond to $175 million. He previously had until today to come up with nearly $500 million. And then there's his hush money case. A judge has scheduled a trial date for that starting April 15th, rejecting Trump's attempts for further delay. The presumptive Republican nominee was in the courtroom for that hearing today.
This is election interference. They are doing things that have never been done in this country before. We've never had anything like it, certainly not at this level, but we've really had nothing like it that I've been able to find.
Robert Costa and Major Garrett join us now. Bob is in New York following that case, and Major is with me here on set. Bob, I want to start with you in New York. So we have this trial date set for April 15th, the first trial of a former president. What reasons did the judge give in this hush money case to start this trial date on this day?
Caitlin, great to be with you. It's evident today, based on Judge Juan Merchan's comments inside the courtroom, that he wants this criminal trial of former President Donald Trump to begin as soon as possible. And he largely sided in his statements today with the prosecution, with the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, saying that while Michael Cohen, Trump's former fixer, was under federal investigation for several years, that the documents produced as part of that federal investigation were given over to the defense team, the Trump team, in as best a way possible by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Trump's lawyers have argued in response that that's not true, that they need more time to review all of these federal documents that have come to light as the basis of that federal investigation. But the big picture here is that the judge wants this trial to begin in mid-April. It will begin in mid-April. And when one of Trump's lawyers said today in court that there's still going to be a delay, they're going to try to postpone this, the judge said effectively, I'll see you on April 15th.
Well, that says that. Major, we know that a legal strategy from the president's team in all of these cases has been to look for ways to delay these cases. In this case, we have the date. How does that impact Trump's ability to campaign?
He's a defendant. He needs to be in the courtroom. When you're a defendant in the courtroom, guess what you're not, Caitlin? You're not a candidate on the campaign trail, whether you're the presumptive nominee of a major party or not, as Trump quite clearly is. For this calendar year, Caitlin, former President Trump has won the politics of indictment. It gave jet fuel to his candidacy for the Republican nomination. Many Republican primary and caucus voters who were wondering whether they would support Trump rallied around him, around the indictments, because they thought he was being treated unfairly. And some forces in American life and law were out to get Trump. Now he's going to have to live with the reality of an actual trial. Indictments are one thing, a trial is another. And much of what former President Trump can say outside of a courtroom, in between proceedings, has political resonance and relevance. All of that resonance and relevance becomes dissipated inside a courtroom, because the courtroom is only concerned with three things: facts, law, and procedure. And in the courtroom, Trump continuously loses on facts, law, and procedure. He wins outside the courtroom when it's an abstraction. Starting April 15th, this case will no longer be an abstraction. It will be a legal reality.
This mood that he was in, I mean, he came out afterwards and called all of this election interference. We know this is not election interference, but how do you assess what he's trying to do here?
So that is a typical Trump tactic. I've watched it play out for many, many years, a kind of political jujitsu. Use the momentum of your opponent to your favor. The former president is, whether you believe the January 6th federal charges are legitimate or not, the most visible figure in all of American political life interfering with the ratification of a presidential election result. No one has tried harder, more publicly and more repetitively, to deny peaceful transfer of power in the history of this country than former President Trump. So when he talks about election interference, he's trying to cast all of that blame that rests upon his shoulders for actions he took intentionally onto some other forces in American political life. Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, it's not his fault that there were hush money payments to Stormy Daniels right as the 2016 campaign was reaching its crescendo. Who was in charge of that scheme? According to the documents and the indictment, Michael Cohen and then candidate Trump. When payments were made to a fictitious legal entity created by Michael Cohen when Trump was president, those checks were signed where, Caitlin? In the Oval Office. Is Alvin Bragg responsible for that? No. He's bringing a case based on those facts. The timing of the case is inconvenient for Trump, but the underlying offenses, as alleged, were his doing, not the district attorney's.
And we have seen Republicans, co-opt that phrase election interference and apply it blanket to anything that they deem.
To whatever fits.
Exactly, yeah.
A narrative of some forces in American political life tampering with the way voters would otherwise judge an election. Yeah. But let's be candid. Voters will judge the 2024 election in part on what former President Trump did with the 2020 election, whether he's comfortable with that or not.
And Bob, you were there. What was the mood like at the courthouse during this hearing and afterwards when Trump talked to the press?
I saw Trump up close today inside 40 Wall Street. It wasn't just the courthouse. He had a press conference afterward, and I stood just a few feet away from him and asked him a question about how he's going to pay this bond. He told CBS News he has a lot of cash. He's going to be able to pay this bond, secure it on time. But what was so interesting to me as a political reporter, put aside the legal aspect of all of this, is he spent the first 10 minutes, let's say, of the news conference really outlining his view that he's angry with President Joe Biden, angry with the Justice Department, angry with the prosecutors in Lower Manhattan. He's angry with this Attorney General of New York, Letitia James. And his grievances are fueling him politically. And when he was asked by reporters if he believes a conviction in the criminal hush money payments trial could affect him, he said it could actually help me. He believes that many Americans will look at this process that he's facing and galvanize or at least be sympathetic toward him. Now, that's a very much TBD prospect politically. It's hard to say any political strategist, red or blue, would want to see their candidate face a conviction during the heat of an election season. But that said, Trump has often used controversy as fuel for his campaigns, which makes him such an unusual political actor on our national stage.
And Bob, I know when you've talked to him before, too, he said that the courtroom is the campaign. That,
it is.
And as Major and I were just discussing, according to the timeline here, it very much is going to be where he is and the only place that he can kind of campaign. Do you feel like they believe that still works to his advantage, or are they kind of internalizing what we were discussing earlier about the realities of what this actually means?
It's complicating the political calculus for 2024, because so often we'd be talking about issues like the economy, like the border, like character, perhaps to a point. But it's Trump's character and conduct that's so front and center due to these ongoing trials and the civil fraud case that it's really pushing to the side so many issues that would usually be cropping up at this point in a general election campaign season. And that could hurt Trump. It could help Trump. It could be a wash. It could be a distraction from the ultimate drivers of what's going to happen in this campaign. But we're in an unsteady political moment where it's so unclear what exactly this all means. If Trump has to pay $175 million, is that a one-week story? Or do people say for the rest of this campaign, the state of New York really believes this person's a fraudster and we don't want to have them as president? Or is it just another controversy that circles around Trump? Trump's betting on the latter. But at the same time, the Biden campaign's looking at all of this and saying the January 6th issue, democracy, hasn't even come to the fore yet with Jack Smith. All of these could ultimately be a weight on Trump, but no one's really sure about how it's going to play out because we're not having a traditional campaign.
Yeah, not a traditional campaign. The understatement of the 2024 campaign, indeed. Bob, thank you very much for sharing your reporting from the scene today. And Major, stick around with us. You'll be here with much more.
They are doing things that have never been done in this country before. You have a case which they're dying to get this thing started. The judge cannot go faster. He wants to get it started so badly.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was former President Trump this afternoon reacting to news that the hush money payment trial in New York will begin officially on April 15th. For more on this, let's bring in Notre Dame law professor Derek Muller, and Major Garrett, of course, is here with us again. Derek, good to see you. Thanks so much for being here. Trump earlier today said that this is all political, that it is unfair, in his words, to have a trial in the middle of an election. So I'm curious kind of how you would assemble an impartial jury for the trial of a former president. Of course, we've never been here before.
No, we haven't. We've never had a former president indicted like this. Then he's running for re-election, so that complicates things. He's been running for re-election for well over a year. It's a very public case, so voters and potential jurors know what is potentially in the air, what's in the water. And we're trying to find out when we voir dire the jurors, prospective jurors, are they going to be impartial? Are they going to be as fair as possible? And are they going to be able to hear this evidence with an open mind and before they convict somebody? It's going to be a very challenging affair from the very beginning of trying to navigate this trial.
Professor, it was said when the Manhattan District Attorney was contemplating these charges that if he brought these felonies, it would be kind of a leap or a stretching of understood law in terms of misdemeanor and felonies. Is that true based on what you've reviewed of this trial as it moves closer to actual courtroom procedures?
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned in the earlier segment was how Trump keeps losing a lot of cases in court. And it's interesting to watch this one because I think there are going to be some challenges for the prosecutors here. I mean, a lot of these business falsification and documents cases, usually they bring an additional charge beyond just the falsification, like larceny, something like that. We don't have that here. We just have the business falsification. And they can't just say that he falsified business records. It had to be falsification with an additional crime underlying it, such as a violation of federal election law, which is a little strange because this is a New York State proceeding referring to federal election law. It's actually deeply unclear whether hush payments are a violation of federal election law. John Edwards, former North Carolina senator who ran for president, also was accused in federal court years ago of paying hush payments to a mistress. Those cases were thrown out. And so there's a question about whether or not this will proceed. So lots of complicated questions for the prosecutors, but then a lot of things that Trump and his team are going to have to defend in these novel charges.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about that lack of a legal roadmap, if you will, because we've not been here before. How do you assemble witnesses for this kind of thing? What would that look like?
Yeah, so here we're going to be trying to trace out from Michael Cohen or his associates about the money that was being gathered and the use for it. I think everyone agrees that this was hush money, right? This was used to silence the former pornographic actress who maybe Trump had an affair with and has denied. But we have the money, just knowing that those things swirling around could have damaged the campaign. So we're going to be trying to find people who had heard of this affair, people who were aware of the money that was going through. But again, we're dealing a lot of records, a lot of documents, a lot of sort of forensic accounting experts, if you will, to talk about these things. And then it's going to be this question about getting into Trump's state of mind. Did he know he was trying to cover something up? He was trying to conceal it. There was this legal question there. It's always the problem in these prosecutions is to get into the defendant's state of mind. And so we'll see what the prosecutor has to show next month.
Professor, for those who watch today's proceedings on the reduction of the bond that the former president has to put up in order to pursue his appeal of the civil fraud case, the separate case, not the one dealing with Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels, they will ask themselves, did Trump win something today, or was it sort of a temporary victory? How would you assess that?
It's only a victory, but I would qualify it as you did as a temporary victory. It's pretty rare for a bond like this to get reduced on appeal. The point is, once you've lost a case at the trial court level before you can appeal, we want to make sure that you have the money in place and you're not just postponing everything. We want to be able to wrap this up if the appeal doesn't have any merit. But this is a huge, huge award at $454 million. Very rarely do we see awards reduced. But in cases, I think of one from the 80s involving some oil companies in the billions of dollars. Those are the kinds of things that get reduced. So the reduction to 175 million, right? That's not chump change, right? That's a significant sum that Trump's team is still going to have to come up with. So a temporary victory that he doesn't have to be on the hook for the full 454 million today, but something short-lived as that appeal is going to press forward and probably press forward fairly quickly.
And is there any chance that that could be further reduced?
It is. So one of the things in appeal, right, is to figure out whether or not that size of the award was justified by the evidence. And so one of the things that Trump's campaign is going to be arguing, first, is that he wasn't liable. But second, that even if he is liable, that he didn't inflate the value of his assets to such a significant degree that this amount of money is what he should be on the hook for. So he will be pressing both whether he's liable and the amount of liability on appeal. So again, it's a good sign that the New York Court of Appeals here is allowing that to be reduced right now. I wouldn't read it too much into it to say that they're going to reduce it in the future, just that as a temporary matter, given the size of the award, they're going to reduce it only to let him appeal so they can hear the case.
All right, Professor Derek Muller, thank you for explaining this in terms we can all understand. A lot to unwind with all of these different cases. We appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
If he's convicted, I will still vote for him because there's someone else running for office that should have been convicted a long time ago.
Welcome back to America Decides. Many Republican voters, as you saw there, in key battleground states are standing behind Trump amid his mounting legal troubles. With a hush money trial set to start in April, the presumptive Republican nominee is going to be spending a lot of time in that courtroom ahead of November. So for more on this, we have Finn Gomez and Katrina Kaufman. Finn is here with us on set, and Katrina is outside the courthouse in New York. And of course, Major Garrett is with us as well. Finn, I want to start with you because we've been kind of talking about the politics of this. And we know, as we've talked about for several months now, that the court cases, play heavily into Trump's campaign. But I'm curious how this specific one may play in. How seriously are they taking this hush money payment case?
Well, actually, you talked about battleground states earlier. There was a poll that came out about a month ago, a Bloomberg poll that showed that if convicted, over 50% of voters in those respective states, we're talking about from Arizona to Wisconsin to North Carolina, Georgia, and so on, that over 50%, 53% would not vote for Trump, according to this poll, if he is convicted, and 23% of Republicans as well. The other thing is we've never been here before. This is historic. We have never had a nominee, from a major party facing criminal charges. This is historic and weird. We have never been here before. So this is something that's the big question. How will it impact his voters, his support, and those battleground states?
I mean, that's a really important point because that's speaking to what we were talking about earlier, the primary versus the general election. Because we saw in the primary over and over again, vast majorities of Republicans were saying they'd support him if convicted. Now you're in a general election climate. That's not the case necessarily.
Right. There's no strategist that Trump can turn to and say, hey, how was it handled before? There is no before, Mr. President. There is no. So you are the author of your strategy. Right. Kind of like he was in 2016. And that, as you well know, Finn, is Trump's natural, most comfortable place. He's his key strategist. His gut instinct is what rules almost all of his political calculations. And those closest to him carry out his instincts, but it's all instinctive. And that's what he's got to go on right now.
Right. It's that notion that in CHP that we know so well from 2016. It's like, let Trump be Trump. And right now, that is their compass politically. That is what they're going on. How this plays, especially in those 7 battleground states, that is where this election will be decided in those 7 states, and how that's playing. We're seeing some voter sound, how that's impacting those voters. That's really just those are his supporters, right? If you're a soft partisan, Trump, I've been told this, is big on the suburban voter, like how this, they're really going after the suburban voter. You would imagine day in and day out for weeks, being coupled on headlines with an adult film star, being reminded of these accusations that occurred back in 2016. Like it is bringing up negative stories that they don't want. The campaign does not want. How is that going to impact the voter?
Katrina, one of the many obligations you have for us, and we are indebted to you for carrying them out on such a consistent and quality basis, is keeping track of the calendar. And it is a hectic and crowded legal calendar for the former president. We're not going to impose upon you every single thing that's on that calendar, but give us a flavor of the next couple of months, if you could.
Sure. So this will be the first criminal trial to move forward against Trump. This hush money case, it is now, as of today, officially set to start on April 15th. It will end up intersecting with arguments that are going before the Supreme Court. And this is Trump's immunity appeal that's related to his D.C. election interference case. Now, the Florida classified documents case was set to start on May 20th. The hush money case will likely actually go till late May at this point. But in Florida, we're also really still waiting for a final trial date from Judge Eileen Cannon. She hasn't fully set that yet. So really, it could be a very crowded summer. There's the Florida classified documents case, the Georgia election interference case, and potentially the D.C. election interference case that all may want to try to start. But it's plausible that this hush money trial will be the only criminal prosecution that actually gets completed before the November election at this point.
And Katrina, we were talking earlier about how the strategy from Trump's legal team in most of these cases, if not all, has been to try to delay the proceedings in any way they can. Why was it not successful today?
Judge Juan Merchan seemed very frustrated today at this attempt to delay the proceeding, and not just to delay it. Trump's team was actually trying to get these charges dismissed. Essentially, the hearing was about a trove of last-minute discovery that came to light. And Trump's lawyers were saying that it was really DA Alvin Bragg's responsibility to request this evidence sooner, and that because he hadn't, this could actually be prosecutorial misconduct that was of a level that would be enough to dismiss the entire indictment. But the judge was not swayed at all by Trump's legal team's arguments today, and this trial is going to move forward as planned. In fact, he actually said that the DA's office went above and beyond in their effort to get evidence for the defense.
Sorry about that, Katrina. Finn, one of our campaign reporters, Torian Small, was in one of the battleground states, Wisconsin, talking to Trump-aligned voters about all of this. Let's take a quick listen.
They're going after this man for whatever reason they are, for trumped-up charges, when they could do the same thing to the other person. They're not doing it.
I mean, look at Biden and his son. To me, if any of that is true, there's legal issues out there on that side that are absolutely ridiculous.
That is a kind of microcosm of the Trump-supporting Republican world, that whatever the former president is alleged to have done, even if true, is either counterbalanced or less severe than the allegations which have resulted in 0 criminal charges against former President Biden, and some criminal charges against Hunter Biden, being prosecuted under the leadership of the Biden Justice Department, we should note.
Right.
That is a healthy sign for Trump, at least among core Republican supporters. Is it not?
Absolutely. They're not going to erode. I mean, talking to a Trump advisor, they say just a little while ago, they say that this plays right into that narrative. You know, this is a political witch hunt. We heard the former president in New York City just say the same thing a little while ago. It's a political persecution. That plays well. That resonates well. What we don't know is that Nikki Haley voter. What we don't know, we heard Mike Pence, who just said his own vice president, tell Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation a couple weeks ago, he was not going to support his own former running mate. Like, where does that voter go? Where does that traditional conservative Republican voter go? We all remember in 2022, if it's an example for this, perhaps it is, perhaps it isn't. But if we look at that Senate race, that key Senate race, where that McCain Republican voter helped the Democrat win, well, the same thing happened here in November on a macro level. I mean, that's a question that I think we all should be asking.
And as we've been talking to voters throughout this campaign, a lot of them, Republicans, have called a lot of these trials a distraction, and they're not really paying attention. The Biden theory of the case, of course, is that they are going to spend a lot of time in some ways reminding them of everything associated with Trump. So we'll see if that strategy pays off as well. Vin Gomez, thank you very much. And Katrina Kaufman in New York, thank you. We appreciate your time.